Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains, welcome to Epic Realms. Tonight's guest is one of the biggest names in the tabletop gaming industry. He's designed and published numerous games throughout the years, including Gurps, Car Wars, Munchkin, Illuminati, Ogre, and many, many, many more. Please welcome the award-winning Steve Jackson from Steve Jackson Games to Epic Realms. How you doing, Steve?
I'm alive. I'm
You're
here. I'm looking forward to the talk.
awesome, awesome. Now I got to start off, and this is probably going to be a pretty common question. Did you always want to design games since you were young? Is that something that was always
No,
on your plans?
no, it was never in my plans. I fell into it by accident. When I was really little, I wanted to be a paleontologist.
Okay.
And later, I wanted to be, this is going to sound cheesy, but it's true. I wanted to run for office and serve the country.
Okay.
And I went to law school and learned more about what running for office really meant and how serving your country worked out. And about that time, I tripped over an opportunity to work on games. And I was definitely a gaming nut. And then one thing led to another.
Nice. Were you the kind of person that did really well in school?
Yeah, yeah. I was an academic.
Okay. It's always I always find it very interesting because you never I always tell people that your walks in life they can vary. So a person could be amazing in school or they could be horrible in school, and if they become successful, that's a great story to help people no matter what your walk is, your whatever your story is. It's a great motivator for people to go, hey, that can be me. And for someone such as yourself, if anybody ever wants to make games, they can go, well, if he was kind of good in school, or if he fell into it, or if the person wasn't good in school, I can be too. So I always like to ask that question about how good they
So
were.
so much of game design involves coming up with random interesting facts or places to start your research. So you can't know too much junk.
Right. Do,
It's just I even today, when my career is probably coming to an end, I won't miss a chance to learn more junk because it might be handy.
where do you get some of that? Do you just like read books or newspapers or
Books,
TV?
that conversation with friends, go to conventions, just every place that people are sharing information. I mean, on the net, you have to be careful and do your research because you can learn many things that are not true on the net.
I've learned that firsthand doing this show. Trust me. What kind of stuff do you find that inspires you when you're just designing a game? Like what stuff always grabs your attention and goes, oh man, that would make a really good game?
Well, I really enjoy science fiction books, and some of the places that science fiction and alternate history writers go are just completely inspiring. But so much of it is random. There's a news site that I visit almost every day called FARC, and some of the information that I get off FARC, again, you have to do your homework and read the story that it points to because the headlines always lie or tell a joke, but you get behind it, there's data.
Does it matter sometimes if it's wrong? If you're making a game, it's like, well, for let's say Illuminati, for instance, it's like, okay, but it's a game and it's kind of fun. Like if it's a little off, is that really that big of a deal for those kinds of games?
It's good to know what's true, regardless of what you actually put in the game.
Okay. How hard is that when people come up and they go, well, is this is fact or this isn't fact? Does that become an issue when people are playing some of those games?
It's uncommon. It has happened.
Okay.
I ran into a full out conspiracy theorist at one convention, and he was hurt and offended that I didn't believe all this stuff.
Especially considering you made Illuminati, right?
Yes, yes.
When you're doing early games such as Ogre or TFT or Illuminati and some of that stuff, how do they compare to the modern, like the modern market, when you're looking at some of those older games, because obviously you're still selling some of them, do they still do well in the modern gaming market with the way that things are, or is it just mostly a bunch of people that have like, I had this when I was a kid?
Some of it is definitely nostalgia, and some of it isn't. Some of it is people coming to the games new and finding them. It's harder to get new attention with the market the way it is for a game that you can't sell as, hey, this is brand new. This is newer than sliced bread. This is what everybody in Europe is playing.
Yeah.
So that is always a challenge. But if you can get them to play the game, if it's good, they'll like it.
Do you still do a lot of focus on trying to get them to play some of the older games, or is it usually now just like, let's focus on some of the newer stuff?
Um, the new I mean, there's obviously some focus on new stuff when it's brand new because I'm in the business of selling games.
Right, right.
But things have to prove themselves to me in the marketplace and in the marketplace of ideas if I'm going to still be paying a lot of attention to them in 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
I've designed a lot of games that you might never have heard of, and that's okay. They probably don't need to be remembered forever. But
Are there any of those games that have disappeared that you really wished you either still had access to, as a because maybe you did them for a different company, or that you just really wished would have taken off more?
well, some of the ones that I developed for metagaming when I was just getting started, it's really tragic that they disappeared. I ended up getting back the rights to everything that I flat out wrote, but I did development work on some games like Chitin and Warp War, and it's just really tragic that you can't buy those anymore.
Have you ever thought about trying to like recreate a modern version that wouldn't get you in trouble?
No,
No.
no, I I'm not sure where the line of trouble would be,
All right.
but in just to take those two cases, Chitin is a high concept game about giant bugs fighting and eating each other. If I did something like that, having spent so much time in the development of Chitin, uh, it would be hard for it not to come out too similar.
Right.
And Warp War is a game with a couple of very specific rules. If you didn't copy those, you wouldn't get the flavor.
Okay.
So, no, there are lots of ideas out there. I don't have to regurgitate somebody else's old ideas.
Right.
I just wish in those cases that somebody else's old ideas were out there to be bought and played.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, instead of coming out with, like I said, some of those newer games, for some of your games, you come out with like different editions of games. How do you know when it's time to make a new edition? Is it based on like market or just a feeling that you have, or you're like, I just want to fix this thing, or I want to revamp something entirely? How do you go about that?
Well, if it's Munchkin, you know it's time for a new version if it's a day ending in Y. And for a role playing system, it's not time for a new version until you seriously see a lot of ways to improve it.
Okay.
Uh, we did like almost 20 years between the preceding edition of G.U.R.P.S and the current fourth edition. And I know perfectly well there are companies out there that want to do a new edition every few years because they can sell it all to the same people.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
Yeah. Because the core rule book is where the money goes. But yeah, as a person who goes, I don't want to buy a new edition. Like I just don't. I want to continue playing the game because if it works, right?
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of GURPS, GURPS was my intro to role playing
Yeah.
originally. Very first, it was early 90s. And to this day, it's still the system that if I ever want to play Highlander, I don't know if you ever watched the movie or the TV series
Oh yeah.
Highlander, GURPS was the system. Just the way it was designed for being able to, get the quickening or whatever like that. Some of the stuff that you guys developed for that worked really well for making it immortal in the world of Highlander and being able to adjust that on the fly. And we just loved playing it for that. What what was it that is there any other games that people have come up with or unique things that people have used GURPS for that you're like, oh, that's something I didn't know of or didn't think of. That's a really cool idea. Has that ever come up?
The thing that blows me away still every so often is when somebody does a mashup of ideas and creates a good combination, a new combination. Like you do take fantasy folk and transhuman space and have science fiction with elves, for instance.
Right.
It's just, I mean, GURPS was intended to be optimized for that, and it's not something that we talk about enough. Is its ability to do mashups.
Right. For sure. Well, and yes, there's so many books. How hard was it going, okay, we got this idea for a book. Was it just when people come up and say, hey, you should do a space vehicles book? And you're like, oh, okay. How was it developing some of those, all of those add-on books?
There was a time when we were releasing two source books a month. I mean, the market was there for it at the time, and we heavily optimized the company to produce GURPS books, which meant lots of hard research and editing as well. There are still ideas out there that have never been done for a GURPS book, and maybe one day we'll get to them. I wanted to do an after the Holocaust book, uh, and we've just never gotten to it.
Is there a book that you guys did come out with that you thought should have done a lot better? That you're like, this was a really good idea. Why didn't people get on board with this?
Well, there's a role-playing game called Goblins that we bought the rights to and did a GURPS Goblins book. I thought that was brilliant, and it remained niche.
Oh, what was it about that game about that book that was
You
standout for
had
you?
It was about a variant human race living in a sort of Georgian England background.
Okay.
And it was very, very intelligently written, very tongue-in-cheek. Uh, I like it enormously. And there's no law that says everybody else has to like what I like, but
Right.
it's nice when that works out, and sometimes it's frustrating when it doesn't.
Yeah. But hey, you got it. You got it.
Yep,
Right?
it's out there.
Well, since we're talking about the different editions of GURPS and stuff like that, and you guys have a new edition of Car Wars coming out, or it's already out, right?
Yes, it's out.
How
It's
did
in the
that
stores now.
evolve uh, when you're talking the original system of Car Wars to now?
Well, there have been a number of editions. It's been a while since the last one, and the last one honestly got too complicated and died of its own weight. It became unfriendly to newcomers because there was so much, not lore, but just technical stuff to learn in order to design a good vehicle.
Okay.
And the focus was shifting more and more toward elaborate vehicle design and less toward, ah, there, kill them all. So we did a new edition, and the goal of the new edition was to totally change the rules while having it play just the same way. This was not easy,
Right.
but I think it was achieved. And I had very little to do with that other than to sit on a play session every few months and say, I think this is the right direction, or no, I don't. And I'm quite pleased with the final outcome.
Nice. And that's really cool because obviously with, being so involved in some of the first stuff and being able to hand it off and have other people work on it, was that nice to be a little bit more hands off and just be able to enjoy it instead of spend all that time working on it?
Well, I enjoyed designing games, but I can't be everywhere at once. And if we wanted a Car Wars game, somebody else was going to have to do it.
Right.
I'm just pleased that it went so well. And then, of course, it was kicked repeatedly in the nads by COVID and the supply chain problems and so on and so on. But it's
Yeah.
out there now.
Yeah, and it's I was at Gen Con and pretty much everybody who walked by was like, "Oh, I used to play Car Wars. I totally got to get this." And it was happening so much. And you and I talked a little bit off stream about because of COVID, you guys made the decision, and I think it's a good decision to push it off another year and not necessarily go to Gen Con, but you were able to have a presence there, and people felt it. They walked by and people were excited about it. Like I said, I was sitting right next to the display, and people were very excited about the next edition of Car Wars. What
The
is the system kind of like now on this new version?
Okay, to start off with, the scale is 4 times as big, and it's played with actual playing cards that are, I said cards, cars, automobiles
Okay.
that are about the size of Hot Wheels cars, if you want a physical comparison.
Yeah.
And those just beg to be painted, and I've seen some marvelous paint jobs. Vehicle design is done with cards, CARDS, pieces of cardstock,
Okay.
and you collect a batch. Collect is a bad used word with cards. You choose a batch that fit within constraints and build a car. You keep track of the car's current status on a really clever dashboard. I was awfully impressed when they came up with that. And the dice are not standard D6. The dice are special with icons on them that mean different things in different contexts.
Okay. How does the
That's it.
game how does the game compare to some of the other like apocalyptic racing games that have come out in the last couple? I know they came out with a game called Wreckage. I know it was a couple of years ago they came out with a Gaslands. How does it compare to some of those?
Yeah, well,
And those were obviously inspired by Car Wars. Let's be honest. They were obviously inspired by you.
system is totally different. Gaslands is a good game. And one thing I really like about Gaslands, aside from its being a good game, is that it really draws modelers.
Mm-hmm.
So a Gaslands game can be visually spectacular. And I hope we get into some of that same place with Car Wars. Uh, how it compares? Well, it's better. No, it's faster.
Okay. So movement and placement doesn't take as long to go through rounds and go through all of the things and
Right.
stuff like that. Okay.
The big problem with the last edition of Car Wars was it just took too long to play around. And we have gotten away with that.
Right. And especially with some of the people that, played the the older version when they were younger, they are adults probably now and they don't have that kind of time. So they get to really enjoy the game again and they'll have the time to play it.
Yes, they no longer have a lunch hour to sit down and design a super detailed car, but it doesn't work that way anymore. You get your vehicle designed by setting out cards, and it's much faster.
When you're coming through and you're designing a game such as Car Wars or you're designing an expansion, do you have your own process personally for like game development? Like, do you come up with an outline or do you just imagine it and kind of think it through for a while and mull it over? Or do you like sit down with a team and go, okay, guys, this is what I'm kind of envisioning. Give me what you got. What is the process for you these days?
I've done all those things at one time or another. There is no one specific process that I go through. Usually the theme comes before the mechanics, but even that, not always.
Do you have any examples
Of
of sitting down and like kind of how you design? So say like Car Wars originally when you were coming up with the concept for that, or Illuminati, or any of the games you came up with.
anything. Well, Dino Hunt is an example of an outline sort of thing.
Okay.
I knew that I wanted to do a game about capturing dinosaurs.
All right.
I made pages and pages and pages of notes, and I worked them into sort of an outline of how the game might go. And it was way too long and complicated. I wanted a light game. And it was then a subtractive process. What what on this outline does this game not really need?
Right.
I really hope to reissue Dino Hunt one of these days.
Okay.
We'd have to do some research because there's been a lot more dinosaur science since then.
Yeah, there definitely is. Well, and that goes back to when you were younger and wanting to do paleontology. So it's like it gives
Yes.
you a little bit. Is that kind
Oh,
of was the inspiration of putting that game together?
no, but it was quickly perceived to be an opportunity.
Okay.
Uh, in the process of making Dino Hunt, I got to hang out with a lot of paleontologists. I even went to a Society for Vertebrate Paleontology meeting, and it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. That's really cool getting to see stuff like that. How is it for you, starting out and enjoying games and now, you've got one of the biggest board game companies. It's not like how is that for you? Because I can't sit here on the other side and go, man, that would be really really cool, or really, do you feel fulfilled?
Usually, yes, there's always room for improvement. And we're not really one of the biggest board game companies. We're the oldest under the same management, but I don't think we've ever broken $10 million in sales. Some years we don't get close, and we have fewer than 40 staff. Just everybody's heard of us, so they think we're bigger than we are.
Well, I consider big as in like popular and well known.
Okay.
That's
Like,
what I mean when I say
big, man.
you're
Okay.
big. Yeah,
Big
yeah.
in Japan.
I mean, when people say, name a couple, name some gaming companies, like yours is always going to be on the list. Those are going to be you and Fantasy Flight. Maybe Atlas is always. Some of those games or companies are going to be on the list of some of the top, in my opinion, of some of the top game companies out there. And
And
maybe I'm also biased because I've been using your product for years as well. So maybe I'm also biased and I'm not qualified to say.
well, we'll take that bias and run happily with it. That's
All
good.
right, sounds good. Uh, is the process that you do now for developing games, is it different than it was, say, in the 80s?
It must be, but I didn't necessarily take contemporaneous notes while I was doing design. Some of them I remember better than others.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to think that I've learned something since the 80s, but I'm not always sure what it is. To a certain extent, I'm like the blind Zen archer. I hit the target a lot, but darned if I know how.
I like it. I like it. Has the industry changed over that course of a time that you've noticed? I mean, obviously it has, but I mean,
Changed over and over again.
how is it that you've been able to stay on top of that? Because I mean, with the advent of obviously your website says it's one of the oldest websites for games out there. It says right on your page. How do you guys keep on top of it? I mean, you guys are all on all the social medias. You guys are doing all kinds of stuff. You guys even have a Twitch channel. Like staying on top of all that for that long. How do you do you have a plan to be like, okay, guys, we got to stay on top of the times, or foresight, or is it just a gift?
I wouldn't call it a plan. It certainly is a goal. The wheel is always turning.
Right.
And if you don't stay close to the top of that metaphorical wheel, you will fall.
Right.
But uh, some of it is luck. Like one of the best game companies ever was Game Designers Workshop,
Hmm.
and they're not with us anymore. They had three bad things happen to them within the same year, and it just drained their finances, and I think drained their energies, and took them down. And they deserved to continue. It was just an amazing group of people doing a lot of amazing work.
What?
So some of it is good fortune. I've had bad things happen, but
Yeah.
never three in one year.
Right. That's tough. What kind of things have happened over the course of the years that you think have been a real boon to the gaming industry?
Well, the creation of the collectible card game brought a lot of interest, a lot of money, a lot of new players.
Right.
The current popularity specifically of D&D 5e, note that I'm not saying role playing. Role playing as a whole is more popular than ever before,
Right.
but 5e has a big bite of that,
Yeah.
and it's across media. It's part of the popular zeitgeist now. If you talk about, oh man, that took a lot of hit points with some total non-gamer, they'll know what you mean.
Right. Yeah. That's true.
Those are those are big ones right there. Those are the two biggest pluses that I can think of right now. Oh, I'll give you a third one, Kickstarter.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Kickstarter was a huge Benny. If you go back farther and look for technological improvements, the wide availability of the personal computer with its printer and a desktop publishing program made things a whole lot different for the casual gamer and the casual game designer than they were when I was first breaking in. Because when I was getting started, it was type, type, type on the typewriter.
Yeah.
Being able to save your keystrokes and come back and improve them later, big deal. You can't imagine how big a deal it was when you hadn't had that.
Do you think it's easier for independent people now to build board games than it was, say, 10 years ago?
Yes, and much easier than it was 20 years ago. The bar to entry has been lowered by Kickstarter, by cheap Chinese factories, although now, because of COVID over there, they're largely slow and inaccessible compared to the way they were 10 years ago.
Hmm.
Yes, it's much easier to be an indie and to be an indie that will be noticed. The downside of it is with so much stuff coming through Kickstarter, you've got 15 minutes of fame and you'd better hit it big during that time.
Right. Do you do you think it's a good thing that there's so many games out there now? Or are you in the boat of rising tides raise all ships sort of situation?
Good thing for whom? It's a very good thing for the gamer. There's more choice than ever before, and a lot of it is good quality choice. For the mid-sized game publisher, it's not necessarily good because you get lots of amateur competition. And good amateur competition is great. That's the rising tide of quality that that you want.
Right.
But there's so much junk coming out there as well that the retailers are overloaded. They don't know what to carry.
Yeah.
The opinion leaders who used to drive people to new games now have more games on their shelf than they can deal with.
Yeah.
So it's like having too much ice cream to eat.
Do you think the shows like tabletop were super helpful as well?
Yes,
How did you
tabletop is helpful. The live streaming of D&D and other role-playing games is popularizes it. but the time Will Wheaton and Felicia Day played Munchkin on tabletop did Munchkin a lot of good.
Yeah. And you got to be on that show.
I did.
How did you enjoy that? Was that fun?
I enjoyed it a lot. I already knew Will slightly. He's a
Okay.
really good guy.
Mm-hmm.
And Felicia is an absolutely killer player. Total strong killer instinct there.
We
Smart and dangerous.
I remember watching that and I remember her saying, well, I only kind of play this game.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That's everybody's excuse. Like, leave me alone. That's a strategy to pretend like you don't know how to play Munchkin.
She impressed me a lot.
Nice. So it wouldn't be beyond me to mention a little personal story here on the show, and I want to share it with you because I really enjoy it. And I've mentioned people that watch our live stream and listen to our podcast. I've mentioned it before.
Fine,
And
we'll change roles. Tell me your story, Eric.
So so we host a holiday party every year with all of our friends, and we do a white elephant gift exchange. So everybody wraps up a gift that's $20 or less, and they bring it, and we throw it all on a shelf, and then we tell everybody they all have to go grab one that's not theirs, and then they sit down at a table, and we pull up Munchkin, and we make sure that we have all of the holiday cards in there, and we make sure that people are like, if somebody affects another player, they're forced to switch a game or switch a gift, or every time they level, they're forced to switch a gift. And then once the game is over, everybody opens their gifts.
Oh,
And so it's gotten to the point now where people will message me on the side and be like, "Hey, we did that for our holiday season this year. It was a hit. Everybody loved doing it. And now it's other people do it for their holiday, their white elephant gift exchange, and they utilize Munchkin." And I wanted to share it because I don't know if you've ever heard of anything like that.
no, I have never heard of that. That's awesome.
So it's such a great, fun game for people that are role players, because we talked about role playing earlier. For people that are role players, for people that just like to have fun, people that like screw your neighbor games. For those that have never played Munchkin, you definitely should check out Munchkin. And you guys have a new Munchkin. You guys have a million Munchkin expansions, really. How is it working? What's that?
I say, but we've got a shiny new one. But okay, do your question, and then
you do have. We'll get to that because it's built in. It's built into this. How is it working with? Because you have to work with all these different licenses and other. You have the Pathfinder Munchkin and you have Gloom Munchkin, and these are identities and things that are from other companies. How hard is it to get licenses and do agreements and stuff like that to be able to develop games like that?
Sometimes it's difficult because, in the grand scheme of things, Munchkin is not a huge game. If you compare it to Monopoly, for instance, it's just
Right.
not a big fat hairy deal. And some potential licensors are looking for Monopoly numbers anytime they talk about a game. Some of them are more realistic, and it becomes possible to do a deal. And every licensor is different. Some of them are very easy to work with. Some of them are very, very picky about details. And it's their property. So, I mean, their house, their rules.
Right.
We appreciate the opportunity. We're doing a series of Warhammer and Warhammer 40K Munchkin things with Games Workshop.
Okay.
And they really pay attention to what comes out, but they're fun to work with. Our contacts have had a sense of humor.
Okay. That's great. Do you have issues sometimes where it's like difficult and they're like, "Oh no, you can't do that. You can't use this, or you can't do XYZ."
Not with Workshop. We had a disappointment like that with Munchkin Batman, because one of my favorite characters from the whole Batman mega story is King Tut. And I wanted to put King Tut in the Batman game that we did with Munchkin, but it turns out that he's part of a different licensing package. It just wasn't available to us.
Oh,
Oh
that's a bummer.
well. Yeah, it was sad, but we got lots of stuff in there. It was great.
That's great. And that's the new one that just came out, right?
That's the new one.
How excited are you to show people this game? Is it something that's just like, are you
On
a
a
big
scale
comic
of
book
1
fan?
to 10, maybe 12, 14, something like that. I mean, I got to write dialogue for Batman.
Right.
John Kovalik got to be a Batman artist for real.
Were you a big fan growing up of Batman and other comic books?
Batman in particular. I was a big fan of the Adam West TV series too. Okay. I really still like the tongue-in-cheek Batman the best of all.
Well, that fits right in for Munchkin, doesn't it?
It does. It fits.
do you no spoilers here, but do you poke fun at some of that stuff?
No spoilers here, but of course we do.
That's great. Were there any other characters go ahead.
The story of the Batman game changes a little bit from the regular Munchkin story.
Okay.
You don't play Batman. You play one of the big supervillains. And you don't kill monsters, you commit crimes.
Okay.
And the crimes range from really trivial ones like jaywalking or take candy from a baby, which isn't automatic. If you've ever tried, it's not automatic. But they go all the way up to reveal the location of the Batcave and so on and so on.
Okay.
And so you say what crime you're going to try to commit, and then the other players will try to help you or try to stop you. And one of the crimes is dip Commissioner Gordon in peanut butter. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with anything that has ever happened in the continuity.
Right.
It's just me being silly.
Right.
But they let it go through.
Yeah. Well, because it's obvious that they must have some sort of sense of humor with it as well, and they kind of get an understanding of what the game is.
Clearly.
Did they come to you, or did you go to them?
We went to them.
Okay. Did it take a while to find out who to actually talk to, considering you've got DC and Warner and Discovery, and like there's all these licenses and all these different people. Was it hard finding exactly where to go for something that big?
Excuse me.
No,
there was definitely a process. I've got to take a 30-second break here.
Yeah, no problem. We will step away and we will be right back.
Okay.
The first two follow one character, and then I spin-off a character, again, spin-off character who is going me. I run that's the novella, Crocodile Tears. But yeah, a lot of fun. One of the main characters, the one who is the primary character in the novella, is his name is Ting. And if you've spent any time in the Caribbean, you know the accent they
Oh yeah.
So Ting, what's that about? It's because my mother always said I was the prettiest little Ting. And the thing is, he's a Rastafarian troll shaman. So he's 10 feet tall, 5 feet wide, belly out to here, dreads down to here, and his name is Ting because he's a pretty little Ting. So it's a joke within a joke.
Again, in case that's not obvious. If your dragon is stymied and runs out of health, he stomps all over the board trying to crush everything and burn it to the ground. Just in one epic.
All right, we are back, and we were talking about Munchkin and Munchkin Batman and some of the licensing stuff.
Yes, you were asking about the licensing process. With Batman in particular, it was a two-stage thing. We do not have a direct license for Batman. We were able to work through our friends at Cryptozoic. And without them, there would have been no Batman project.
Okay. Shout out to Cryptozoic.
Yes, absolutely.
Did you, was there anything else, any other characters that you were like, I totally got to get this character in there?
Well,
Besides the obvious, like Batman and Joker and Robin, obviously.
besides the obvious ones, I would have been very sad if we couldn't put Harley Quinn in, but that was no problem.
Nice.
I was afraid that because she was a newer character, she wouldn't be part of the package, but she's fine.
Excellent. What about Bane? Is Bane in there? No spoilers, of course.
No spoilers. Bane is in there as a henchman.
Okay.
He's not a playable character.
Okay. Cool. We've had, I don't know if you know who Chuck Dixon is, but we've had Chuck Dixon on the show and we chatted with him, and obviously he's the creator of Bane. And so I was like,
yes.
Well, I'm kind of really curious because he's out. I don't want to, I guess he's not newer now at this point. To me, he's a newer Batman character, but that's 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm older than I look. So shifting gears a little bit, you've got one other thing that you kind of mentioned, and that's this. You've got a 3D printing project, and I heard a little bit about it, and you've chatted about it on other shows about kind of how you didn't want it to be associated with this specific game. You just wanted it to be 3D miniatures. Tell us a little bit about it, about what you've got going on, what you can tell us.
Well, the only limit on what I can tell you is due to my own uncertainties. So if I seem to be skidding over something, feel free to bring it back to me, and at that point I can either answer or I can say I don't know.
Right.
But I have gotten heavily into 3D printing myself with a resin printer. I have been a miniatures player for a long time. 3D printed figures are just better, and the idea that I can go out into the shop and make them is just amazing.
Right.
So we have gotten into creating and selling STL files, which are the raw material for 3D printing. We have a set out now called Foes that is designed specifically to work with Fantasy Trip, but it's got skeletons and orcs that are good for any game. I mean, skeletons and orcs, how can you go wrong?
Right. Well, that's the thing with minis is oftentimes, especially, if you're playing Pathfinder or D&D or any of those and you've got minis, you want to have an army. You want to have 30 skeletons, but it's cool to not have to have the same one 30 times.
30 of the same skeleton, exactly. And there are armed octopi in there as well. That's specifically a Fantasy Trip thing, but they're very neat. Anyway, Foes 2 should drop before the end of the year. So more things to fight. The really big STL project that we're working on is a terrain project.
Okay.
We did a temporary drop of that, really just I don't want to say as a marketing tool, because it was an educational tool for us as well. We learned a lot from doing it, but for a limited time, we actually made the 0.9 versions of the terrain product available on our website.
Okay.
And we sold some, and we continue to support those users, but the big drop is going to come early next year.
Okay. Do you have like a group of designers, a group of people that can come up with the designing the miniatures, or do you just have one, or do you license it out elsewhere?
2 as a group, right?
Yeah. 2 as a group.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Is there a plan to incorporate some of that into, say, Car Wars, so people, you can get people, because you talked about how, you'd like to get Car Wars to be at a place where, you get modelers doing stuff. Is there thoughts of having some 3D printed designs for Car Wars and, weapons and attachments and stuff like that?
There is not yet a plan, but there is an aspiration.
Okay. Cool. Because I think that would be right. If you're doing one, it'd be right up your alley to be able to support both doing the same thing, especially since you have a lot of similar audiences, and it's all 3D printing, right?
Yes.
All right.
You need some new and different tricks to print something the size of cars, but it's doable.
Right. For sure. All right. So you have upcoming, you mentioned you've got a convention called FnordCon. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes, you're pronouncing it exactly right.
Yes, and that's an online event, right?
Yes, so we have done live ones in the past, but this is one of the online ones. It's going to be November 11th and 12th. It'll be held on our Discord.
Okay. And people can find your Discord right on the website, which is sjgames.com, I believe.
Yes, they can also get information about the convention as it nears by, Google for FnordCon if you forget the details.
Yeah, definitely. And how are they just doing, is it going to be like, how are they going to do physical components of games via Discord? Are you going to have somebody that's like doing stuff, or is it just whoever's running it is running it?
It's more of a panel discussion and question answering thing than it is live gaming online.
Okay.
At some past online events, we did a gaming track and a talk track, and we found that very few people wanted to play the games when they could talk about them.
Okay. Well, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, it's just people going, I can play games anytime, but here's my chance to buttonhole the people who make them.
Right. Yeah, for
sure.
So
it was complimentary to everybody except the people who worked hard to make the online games available and then got few takers. That was kind of a bummer.
Yeah. With things like online conventions, and we talked a little bit about technology these days, how much you guys also have on your website, you have some like online games and, phone games and things like that. What kind of other routes are you guys going? Do you guys do anything with, like, say, Tabletop Simulator or Sovereignty games or anything like that? There's I forgot the name of it again. The game board.
Game board. Game board is a game playing device. Let's see. This description would probably not be approved by their marketing department, but I'm going to give it anyway. Do you remember all the hype about a product called Microsoft Surface
a little
decade and a half ago?
Yeah, a little bit.
It was a big flat TV. It never really got off the ground. It sounds like this is going, I say it sounds like, I've got one of the beta. It is what the Microsoft Surface was supposed to be.
Okay.
It's a flat video surface, touch sensitive, and you play games on it.
Yeah, and I've seen the videos, and it looks really cool. You can either be like, you upload, if you want to do role playing, you can upload the maps and it'll literally move your miniatures like a sideways laid down TV, like a lot of those people do, or they have literally a game on there that just sits on the table and people can interact with the games.
And you put meeples on the board and it senses which meeple it is. It's very good.
Awesome. That's cool. That is super cool. Tell us about a little bit about the Munchkin costume contest, because I'm really curious about this. What is the Munchkin costume contest? One of your people mentioned in an email chain, and I'm really curious. Is this an online thing, or is it something for Halloween?
It's the judging doesn't close until after Halloween, so people can double dip on their costumes. But no, it's an online thing. Okay. Dress up as a Munchkin character, send us a picture, win moderate prizes.
Okay, well, that's cool. That's fun. And I'm assuming that can all be found on your website at sjgames.com.
Yes.
Awesome.
Or at munchkin.game.
Munchkin.game. There we go. You're also on Twitter at sjgames. You do have a Twitch channel, twitch.tv/SteveJacksonGames. I saw somebody was doing some mini painting on there not too long ago. Facebook /SJGames. Instagram at Steve Jackson Games, and even on YouTube /Steve Jackson Games. You can be found at all those locations. You're everywhere. You're everywhere.
We're almost everywhere. We actually have a TikTok too, but it has not been active recently, but we're going to do something about that.
I should have tagged you on some of my TikToks then.
Cool.
Awesome. Friends and enemies, everybody watching and listening, October 17th, we're going to be joined by hip-hop musician Nerdy is going to be joining us. He just recently was the opening act for Ludacris. We're going to talk about his gaming inspirations, wrestling, and of course, music. That's going to be live October 17th. The podcast will be available the following Tuesday on the 18th. October 31st is our Halloween episode. We're going to be joined by RPG developer Siegfried Trent. He's working with a new role-playing company called Evil Genius Games. They have the RPG licenses for a lot of pop culture movies such as Highlander, The Crow, Pacific Rim, and more. So join us for that on October 31st. The podcast will be available November 1st. And of course, guys,
I watched that one myself. That sounds like a good concept.
It's going to be super cool. I went and met them at Gen Con. I specifically sought them out and I was like, I have you guys on the podcast. And then some of the artwork, I've seen Facebook ads and stuff. I'm like, this looks super cool. Hopefully the system is as good as the cover art all looks. So I'm excited for it. November 14th, everyone, we're going to have the star of Discovery's Ghosts of Devil's Perch and the star of Holzer Files. He's also the host of the Paranormal 60 podcast. Dave Schrader is going to be joining us to talk all things paranormal. That's going to be November 14th, and that podcast will be available on the 15th. So everyone, be sure to rate and review, subscribe, follow, click all of the buttons. It all helps us, and in turn, helps our guests. So go back and listen to some of our older episodes, and make sure to talk about this one. Thank you so much, Steve, for joining us. I am so glad you were able to join us.
Thank you for having me. This has been a good interview.
Everybody, for Steve Jackson and Steve Jackson Games, I am Nick, and I want to thank you all for listening to Epic Realms.